Hey, I'm Chip Bennett, and I just want to thank you once again for joining us here at Reaching the Next Generation. Please, if you would go on to all of our social media, you see them at the bottom of the screen, like them, subscribe, and more importantly, send them out to people that you know that can be helped with this type of information. You can also find everything that you would want to find about this at reachnextgen.com. So make sure that you put that reachnextgen.com. It's a website. You can get a lot of information there. But once again, thanks so much for tuning in, whether you're listening or whether you're viewing. We're glad to have you. Today, I am so blessed and honored to have Mark Denison here. You're with There's Still Hope. Mark, we're going to talk about some things today. I'm going to be candid with you. I'm not a professional on any of this. This is something that isn't necessarily a class on how to teach or an apologetics class or how to answer questions. This is something that if our personal lives are not right, there's no way we're going to reach the next generation, because if we end up invalidating our ministry, then we're going to be in trouble. And your ministry, There's Still Hope, you deal with pornography addiction. I want to learn everything I can today, and I want our viewers and listeners to hear what you have to say. Can you first of all just start off with a little bit about There's Still Hope? Tell us about what you do, and then I want to ask you some real specific questions about pornography addiction and what we can do to maybe help pastors and leaders.
Sure, you bet. No, thanks, Chip.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. It's a real honor to be with you. Love
Appreciate
everything
it.
you guys are doing. There's Still Hope was formed about 3.5 years ago to respond to this incredible pandemic of porn and sex addiction that not only is invasive throughout society, but in the church. I come from a pastor's background, was a senior pastor for 31 years, and so I really have a passion for the church. So when Beth and I felt called to start this ministry, it is unapologetically Christ-centered. We want to bring biblical principles alongside recovery principles that we know work. We have our own story, we have our own background, we have our own struggles, but we want to help the next generation as who's really dealing with this. And so specifically what we do with the ministry is several things. I write a daily devotion called the Recovery Minute that goes out all over the place just to give some good biblical principles and teaching in the struggles of addiction, especially with pornography and other sexual addictions. My wife coaches women that have been traumatized by this because of their husband's porn habit. I deal with the guys. I've got a 90-day program very specifically oriented toward guys that are struggling with pornography that takes them through some principles that are very specific on how to deal with trauma, how to deal with abuse, how to deal with isolation, how to come out of that with biblical answers, therapeutic answers that apply to them. Also have groups that meet throughout the week. I've got guys from all over the world in our Zoom groups. We do a local group here in Bradenton, Florida, for guys that are really serious about maintaining their sexual integrity and their purity. We're going to start Recovery Church, which will be a Sunday night or a Tuesday night event here in Florida that will also be online to give more Christian principles and more of a worship setting. So that's the gist of what we do. It's growing really fast because the need is just tremendous, and we're really blessed to address that need.
That's all. I mean, what a tremendous ministry. So I want to glean from you everything I can in the short time that we have today. How pervasive, because I mean, you're going to probably teach me some things. I'm sure the people that are listening are going to learn some things. Can you give me an idea of how pervasive pornography is just in American culture?
Yeah.
Like if you were to say, okay, here's 100% of American culture, and this is how pornography works. Where are we at there? Give me.
Well,
it's probably shocking, but give me the stats.
It is. I wrote a book, Porn in the Pew, that talks about how pervasive it is in the church. But part of the research for that is looking at the massive amount of research. It's just coming in every day, and it's being changed. But 64% is the general number we work with of men that are looking at pornography at least once a week. And
64% of men in
America
are looking at pornography at least once a week.
As self-reported.
And so the number's obviously higher.
Yes. Yeah, no one gets a call in a survey and says, I'm really not, but I'm going to tell you that I am anyway. So it's obviously much
not
higher.
on that particular issue.
Absolutely. And we know that the first age on average for people to view pornography is about 9 or 10 now. It was 11. It's down to about 9 or 10. 99% of men in America have viewed porn at some point. Of course, it started with a hard copy, as they would see their dad's Playboy, and now it's so accessible. $43 billion annual industry. More people are spending money on pornography online than Netflix and all the social media outlooks combined, it's staggering numbers. Pornhub that is out there self-reports these numbers will double almost every year of the number of people looking at pornography. Our concern is within the Christian context.
Sure.
As Christians and Christ-centered in the ministry, we're really bringing the Christian principles to bear on this. And that's where it's really stark, is that whereas 64% of men in America within the church, that number is 62%. And so it's basically the same. And we know that believers, and those are evangelicals, many are not going to report that even though they're struggling with that.
Mm.
And within ministry, it's high. 37% of pastors are looking at pornography at least once a month.
37% of pastors
37%
are,
of pastors.
self-reporting that they've looked
Yes.
at pornography once a week
Once a
or
month,
once a
once a
month. Okay.
month. And among student pastors, it's over 50% because they tend to be younger. And so the numbers are just absolutely through the roof. And it's being ignored for the most part. So we see what we're up against. And I could give you all kinds of statistics, but it's mind-boggling to see how pervasive this is.
How does that like? And I mean, you may not have an answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just as I'm thinking. How does that happen? Like, how does that? How's that so entrenched in culture? Is there a mechanism that's, I mean, I'm
Yes.
sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that we moved from books to the internet, so it's more accept. But I mean,
Right.
are there ways in which they're rooting themselves into these men's lives and pastors' lives, or is it just everybody just out looking for it?
Well, the way I like to say it
Okay.
is that porn is really not a bad problem as much as it's a bad solution. No one just wakes up and says, I want to look at pornography. It's a response to three things: abuse, isolation, and some form of trauma that may not even be known. I may have been abused sexually when I was an infant, and I don't even know that. But there's so much trauma, abuse, and isolation, and this is the response to that.
Hmm.
I'm trying to be connected. It's an intimacy disorder. So if I'm married, I don't have intimacy with my wife. I'm looking for the safety of pornography and masturbation because that's my most reliable friend. It's always there when I need it, and I can find it anytime I want it. And so you find a guy that's out there that's doing substance abuse and he's hooked on cocaine or heroin, and he can always tell you, he can go into a city and in about 30 minutes find his drug of choice. He knows how to do that. I wouldn't have a clue. But if I'm looking for pornography, I don't need that guy to help me because it's every place. I can go online and find it immediately. And the really scary thing is that it's progressive. And so if I start out looking at a little porn, it's going to become more, and then it's going to go into other areas. For example, 60% of heterosexual male sex addicts cross the gender line, meaning I'm heterosexual, I'm not homosexual, but at some point, I'm going 60% chance if I'm hooked on porn, I'm going to look at male pornography or a male hookup relationship. Simply because it's progressive, because it doesn't satisfy. What I did today doesn't satisfy tomorrow.
Okay, so it is there's a mechanism in our brain with however we function. You need more and more.
Yeah, it's a dopamine hit, and
Okay.
and it's never satisfied, and it
Wow.
rewires the neural pathways of the brain and the frontal cortex. And so what I need today is good today, but it won't satisfy tomorrow. So tomorrow, what was 10 minutes today becomes 20. And then it becomes a different partner, a different kind of porn that can lead anything from child pornography, which has become a huge problem now. And then with child pornography, if I download child porn and don't even know I'm doing it, there are people watching this that know technology better than I ever would that can hook into my system, and now it becomes a federal issue. And so it just spreads out in so many enormous ways. We worked with so many guys that are now in prison because of this, and because it is progressive. It never just sits where it is. It goes to, in fact, right now, the most prominent time for people to look at porn is during work hours, because they can do it at work. They can look at their computer. There's not enough monitoring there, and so it's become so huge, and unfortunately, also within the body of Christ.
Wow. So let's wow. So uh, pastors, leaders,
Mhm.
Christian people who want to do something for the Lord tend to be the people that watch Reaching the Next Generation. What do you say to the person who's watching right now, who's stuck this out? They're still listening,
Yeah.
and they know deep down inside this is them.
Yeah.
Like that they know it, but and for whatever reason they didn't click off and go, I don't want to listen to this anymore. Maybe something inside, maybe the Spirit of God, maybe the Holy Spirit arrested them and got them to right here. What do you say to a pastor, to a leader, to a Christian who's watching this that's addicted or watching some or tinkering with? What would you say to them right now?
First thing I would say is guardrails. Got to have guardrails up
Okay.
from day one, because if you don't, you're in trouble. One of the reasons that ministers and working with the next generation, it's an issue, is because by very nature of our calling by Christ, we're relational.
Okay.
I mean, that's why you and I are talking to each
Sure.
other. There's a relationship.
Yep.
And with that relationship comes danger. Because of the relationships that are there, as I say to pastors all the time, the second you stepped into the role as a pastor, you became a lot better looking to women than you were before,
Mm,
because you're a person that gives care. You care, there's
gotcha.
compassion. And so, guardrails. Don't be alone with the woman. Don't be up late at night. Don't watch movies without your wife in the room. Got to have a lot of guardrails up. Once you begin to cross those lines, you've got to get help, and you got to do it quickly.
Okay.
Our ministry is available for that. There's still hope, and so guys reach out to us all the time.
And how can where is it? There'sstillhope.com? Is
Dot
there a
.org, there's
dot
still
org?
hope. .org.
There'sstillhope.org. If you're watching right now and you're like, hey, you know what? This is hitting me. I need some help. There'sstillhope.org is a great place to at least reach out to maybe get some help. So, what do you
Absolutely.
say to a pastor that goes, okay, these guardrails, like not being able to watch a movie without my wife and not being able to stay up late, like, man, you're putting religion on me. You're putting, what do you say to somebody who says that?
Get over it. Ask your wife, what makes her feel safe, what makes her feel
Okay.
comfortable. Because the problem is the gateway stuff. It's the movie that's not even R-rated. It's a newscast. I mean, what I have guys tell me all the time is, I was just watching some kind of a cable news show
Okay.
or a sportscast, and I saw a sideline reporter. I saw someone that was a news reporter, and I just Googled them because I was curious, because they had an accent. Wonder where they went to school. Next thing you know, you're looking at pictures. Then you're looking at something else. And then that leads to something else. And you start thinking, I'm looking for someone that looks like that now. And so it's just such a gateway.
Wow.
And so the key is to just shut it down and don't do anything that's not safe. And we all have different triggers. My triggers and yours are going to be different.
Mm,
And so I tell young guys, you got to know your trigger. What is it that triggers you? What is it that for you is just gets your brain going? What gets that dopamine rush
mm,
going? Because there's a cycle that happens with us that I tell guys all the time. I think it, I plan it, I do it, I hate it, I cover it, and then I go do it again. So
mm,
it all starts with the thinking it and planning it. And so what I will say to young guys is, you can't help but think it, because it's out there
mhm,
everywhere. Some studies say that guys have as many as 1,000 sexual thoughts a day.
mm,
Now, doing the math, I don't even know if that's possible, but we know it's a lot.
mhm,
So I'm driving down the street, I see somebody, or someone walks in, even at church, and they trigger me. I think it. It's that planning stage where we get off the rails, because that's a dopamine hit. I start planning it. I start envisioning what this is going to look like,
mm.
and then I'm hooked. So the reason to stay away from certain TV shows and certain triggers is because you don't want to go from thinking it to planning it. There's a guy that I've worked with who's an airline pilot. And because of that, he flies all over the country. So what he does, he knows his trigger, staying up late at night by
Mm,
himself watching TV. Just good movies, doesn't have to be anything wrong with them.
sure.
So he had the problem of watching TV, being up late, and then that would trigger his mind, and he would get in trouble with porn or masturbation. So he said, "What do I do?" I said, "What I would do is unplug the TV." So he did that. Problem was, he's an airline pilot. He's smart enough to know how to plug it back in. So after a couple hours, you get up, plug it back in. What I do? I said I would take the remote and go put it in your car. But he's an airline pilot. He's smart. He knows how to go unlock the car at 2 in the morning, get it out. So now he takes the remote control, gives it to the front desk, and says, "I'm on a fast from television. I don't want the remote for the rest of the night." And they lock it away. So whatever it takes, because we have different triggers, to avoid going down that slippery slope.
Okay, so talking to people who you said what guardrails was the first thing you said.
Yeah.
I think you said you had 3. Was there something else?
Well, I was talking about the three things that get us in trouble,
Okay.
which are our trauma, our isolation, our
Okay.
abuse. But the number of guardrails, there's no limit to those. We've got to
Okay.
have guardrails on our one of the things we get in trouble with, obviously, is the internet. And so, uh, one of the great benefits that's out there is an organization called Covenant Eyes out of Owasso, Michigan. And for $10 a month, I can go on there, and it's just covenanteyes.org, I think, and I can sign up. And the way it works is that there is a report. Let's say you're my accountability partner,
Okay.
and I designate that, you agree to it. So we'll send you a report every single day that will show you anything that I've looked at that was inappropriate.
Okay.
So I've got 30 or 40 guys that I'm their accountability partner right now. So that's a really good guardrail.
Okay.
Other ones are don't be alone when you travel. For some guys, don't be alone with a woman. Even on an elevator, on an airline, don't sit next to a woman if you can avoid it. But guys have to know their guardrails because
What
they
do you
know their
say?
triggers.
I've had women say to me, like,
Mhm.
somebody stood up and said, I don't go somewhere where I'm alone with a woman. I don't do, and they're like, that is such a sexist statement.
Yeah,
That is such a,
yeah,
you make it look like women are terrible
right,
and all of
right.
that stuff. Any response you have for that?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. They asked Billy Graham that, and he said, "It's not that I don't trust the woman; I don't trust me." And there's the appearance of evil thing, but more than that, it's like, why would I want to put myself in that position to even have the temptation? And so I just know myself well enough to know that I don't want to put myself in a position
Sure.
to have the image or the temptation that might be difficult for me.
What the church, and I think you probably would agree with me, the church probably does not do, I don't know the word, it's not even probably, the church doesn't do a very good job of handling pornography. I'm guessing some of that is because we don't know how to talk about it.
Yeah,
I'm also guessing it might not be talked about because maybe the pastor's struggling with it.
yeah, yeah,
You'll find that a lot of
yeah,
times pastors won't deal with things that,
yeah.
or it's the reverse. What they're, totally,
Hmm.
beating everybody up over every weekend sometimes is
Hmm.
their own hidden sin. What, in your opinion, can a pastor or a leader who's hearing this and going, wow, these are shocking numbers
Yeah,
and this is stuff, surely we got to do better.
yeah,
What can the
yeah.
church do? Like, and I'm not asking for 1 or 30 steps, but I'm just,
Sure,
what
sure.
what can the church do to do a better job
Yeah.
of handling pornography?
Well, 7% of churches have anything to offer. And so you're absolutely right. Churches don't have an answer. The number one thing they can do is for the pastor to lead with a limp. And what I mean by that is confessional leadership. The pastor has a porn problem, doesn't have to announce that. If he doesn't need to tell them all his struggles. My view is they need to know that he's human. They need to know that he has struggles. He needs to be able to lead with a limp. He needs to say, guys,
Mm,
this is an issue for a lot of people. Whether it's my issue or not, we all have issues. There's 166 addictions out there. We all have something. So when the pastor stands up and says, I'm not perfect, I struggle, you struggle, we all struggle, and then addresses the subject, maybe has a guest speaker in to address
mhm,
it, or refers them to groups and ministries like ours. But it has to begin with the pastor saying, I don't have everything together.
mhm,
I'm your pastor, I'm your friend, I have my own struggles, and
mhm,
I just want you to know that's okay. We want to be a safe place to land,
mhm.
and we're going to provide resources for you because it's safe for us to go there. I want you to feel safe. But if the pastor doesn't say that and gives some kind of impression that he's a theologue over here and an academic who doesn't also have real life struggles, then they don't feel safe.
Mm.
So it starts with the pastor. And then when he says, we have resources for you, and it's okay, whether it's drugs, alcohol, porn, whatever that is, we want you to feel safe
Okay.
here in the body of Christ because I struggle, we all have something, and then suddenly they feel safe. So that's, for us, that's where it begins. And then pointing people, don't try to be the expert on everything, but just saying, we want to give you some resources that are here.
What, how would a pastor, so let's say a pastor hears this or a leader hears this
Hmm.
and says, okay, yes, I can get up and say, hey, I'm not perfect. I don't walk on water, all that stuff. How do I then, what's the next step for me, Mark, to be able to resource my people? Like what, like pastors hear this and they go, we're gonna attack this, and
Yeah.
then a week or two goes by and they're like, I don't even know what am I gonna do. Like I don't even know how to. I think I heard maybe I should be vulnerable, but I don't. But what else do like? What are some other next steps maybe that a pastor could take to resource his people?
That's a great question, Chip. What I would do is have the pastor have a set of resources ready to go
Mm,
whenever someone comes to him,
okay.
because he's going to be approached one on one, obviously not in a group. And a couple of resources. One is to always know a CSAT. That's a certified sex addiction therapist. that's someone with the highest training in therapy in the field. And
Okay.
many of them are Christ-centered. And to know the CSATs, there's not a lot of them out there, but to have that person ready to refer. Local 12-step groups are good resources. In a
Okay.
community like ours, there are 2 SA groups that meet here every week. That's Sexaholics Anonymous.
Okay.
Not Christ-centered, it's kind of in the AA model.
Okay.
And then ministries like ours, and there are many others that offer groups online. But to have some of those resources available, and we're very quick to tell guys we're not for everybody, but we will direct them to many others.
Okay.
So in our ministry, we're very happy to tell people here's some other places you can go. There's some really good intensive things there, and I hesitate to name one because I'll leave out 5 or 6 others. I have good friends that run all
Gotcha.
of these,
Okay.
so lots of opportunities that are out there. And anyone that contacts us, if there's still hope, we love to refer people to some of those.
Are there any like off the top of your head, any books, websites, um, people, any like concrete
Yeah,
here's you can go here
yeah,
and get some
yeah.
resources?
Well, I'm my own favorite author
Okay, well,
sometimes,
that's
so I don't
okay.
mind saying
There's
that.
nothing wrong with that.
We've written 8 books ourselves,
Okay.
and one is for guys that want a 90-day recovery program, others that want to be in a group. For the wives who've been traumatized because of their husband's addiction, my wife is an expert in that area, and she has a great book on that.
Okay.
So we have some great resources. There's a guy named Jay Stringer, who's probably the smartest guy I know other than Chip Bennett. And I don't get out a lot, but
Well, you must not.
I don't, yeah. But Jay has written a book called Unwanted,
Okay.
and it's talking about our unwanted fantasies that
Hmm.
we can learn from. It's really good stuff.
Okay.
There's a group called Samson Society. There's a group called Be Broken Ministries. These are a couple that are good friends of ours that have fantastic resources. There's another one called Brave Hearts, and they're 180 ministers, a lot of them out there. But they all offer a lot of different resources that are really, really good. But Unwanted is a fantastic book. It's really helpful.
Okay. It's great because, like,
Yeah.
if you were to, I mean, if you were to ask me, hey, what's a good theology book, or what's a good book on biblical criticism, or
You'd
what's
be
a good,
good.
yeah, but what I'm saying is like this is an area that
Sure.
you realize is, if you want to say leading with a limp, you realize, wow, how far behind the 8 ball am I on this particular issue? What about a pastor who goes, I'm not coming out and telling anybody because if I say something, somebody will tell something about somebody? Because for a pastor, it's a little different. I mean, if I'm an attorney, or if I'm a car salesman, or if I'm a mechanic, and somebody says, oh, well, they're, looking at porn. I hate to say it, but maybe people at work could give them a high five.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it's that completely, but you understand, I think,
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
a pastor comes out and goes, I'm
Yeah.
addicted to porn. They're not getting a high five.
Yeah.
No. Typically.
No.
Can we genuinely say that there's some discreetness with these groups that do help pastors? Is there some confidence? Can they take some? If somebody's listening, can they go, okay, I can take that step forward because
Yeah.
they're not going to blast me?
Well, you've isolated the problem. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a dangerous place to go
Hmm.
because it's such a risky thing for a pastor to ever say that. I'm writing a book right now called Broken Vessels, and it's
Okay.
about pastors who are broken vessels, broken by this issue.
Hmm.
And what do they do? Where do they go? And I would say, and I hate that this is sort of self-promoting, but I just don't know anyone else that's doing this. We have a pastors group with our ministry that meets every week by Zoom,
Okay.
and there's total anonymity there, and meaning that I legally cannot, if you ask me who's there, I legally can't tell you.
Sure.
And so it's a safe landing place for them. And coming to us through their
Sure.
hope.org. This morning on the way over here, I got the phone number texted to me of another pastor who just fell, who wants to get in touch with me.
Wow.
Because anonymity is a huge thing for these guys.
Sure.
And so, unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources there for those guys where it has to just be safe. Have a doctor's group, because physicians, if it's found out they're looking at pornography, then that's an issue for them. And so
Okay.
they need to meet just doctors. So we do that as well. But there's not a lot of resources there for the pastors, and they can always say more later. And I advise them all the time, be careful what you say, because you may be looking for a job the next day. Now, in some cases, they need to, because they've crossed certain lines,
Mhm.
and they need to step away from preaching. I totally understand that.
Sure.
But they need a safe place to land, and that's hard to find.
If a pastor or leader's listening right now and they do find themselves in some sort of addicted type of situation with
Yeah.
pornography, do they need to step down?
I think that's a huge question that I can't answer. Uh, it in some cases absolutely, in some cases no, because there's this long continuum from I've looked, as 99% have, to I'm fully engaged, and there comes a point where absolutely they do,
Yeah.
because for one thing, the inward battle within them is going to eat them alive,
Mm,
and they've got to get help,
gotcha.
and they can't do that while they're still out here. They can't live the double life. They've got to get help. And so at some point, absolutely, they do. Their own faith tradition, their own theology, how
Sure.
they interpret Scripture. Because you'll have the guy that says, well, I go to Romans 7. And Paul says, what I don't want to do, I find myself doing. What I do want to do, I find myself not doing. And so we hide behind Paul. We say, Paul struggled with sin. We know he sinned. It's very clear. John says, if a man says he doesn't sin, he's made God out to be a liar.
Sure.
The truth is not in him. But then on the other hand, obviously, there comes a time when the guy has got to step away. And one of the things we help a lot of ministries do is to restore those guys. We have several fallen pastors within my group of
Hmm.
pastors I'm working with now in my Thursday meeting that have stepped away. And we're helping to restore them and put them in a position where they can return to ministry. So many times they absolutely need to step away.
Does the local church, a lot of times I feel like, it's not just the area of pornography. I mean, there's
Yeah,
other sins
yeah,
that nip at people's ankles and can potentially hinder them from going forward in ministry. Do you think the local church needs to be a little more understanding? Like, for instance, let's say I, as a pastor, get up and say, "Hey, listen, I've been struggling with this particular sin, um, and I'm going to go get help. I'm enrolling myself into a particular group because I really want to get help." Um, should the local churches say, "Hey, we love our pastor and we want to help them get some help, but we don't really want to terminate him at this particular point because we understand everybody has some sort of struggles"? Is that a? I'm trying to think of like how the church in America can do a better job, because oftentimes I think when pastors finally get caught, like I think they might step forward quicker if
hmm
they felt like that there was a
yes,
net, so to speak. I mean, like I'd be more likely to walk on a high wire if there was a net
yeah,
than if there wasn't a net. And I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying, please don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, hey, pastors should be able to do whatever they want to do, not lose their job. Let's just create this
sure,
cush job that, I'm going to go get some counseling now. But is there a place in the church for a little bit more grace
yeah,
for these particular
yeah.
things?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the hard things for pastors, though, is because as you know, the longevity of a pastor is usually about 3 years, and so he doesn't
Is
have
it three
trust.
now? I always say
It's
five.
it's that's the number I've heard.
Okay.
It's not long,
No,
and so they don't have trust. They haven't built the trust up yet, and so
you're right.
if he's only been there a year and he shares this, they're like, You're not who you said you were when you came. You're
Mm,
done. We're done with you." But one reason it's important to show that grace and do exactly what you said is number one, so he can get help. Number two, for his family. Because if you kick him to the curb, what is the wife going to do? What are the children going to do? Now
mm,
he has to move.
yeah.
Now there's a big
Yep.
thing out there in the community and it becomes very difficult. So, absolutely, if there's a safe place to land early on, they would get help before it got worse because it always progresses. And if they felt safe
Yeah.
early on, then man, it would be so good for them to find that safe haven. I love the way you said it, having the net.
Yeah, you struggle because there will be people that go, "Oh, well, you're just now creating a place for people to do whatever," and that's not what I'm saying. I just think that James, to me, in chapter 5, he envisions a place
Yeah,
where people can come and confess
yeah,
their sins one
yeah.
to another. He doesn't envision a place that where I get up and say, "Here's what I've struggled with," and everybody throws stones at me, pelts
Right.
me, and says you need to move to the next town. He envisions a place where you can truly confess your. And what's interesting is when he talks about confess your sins one to another that you may be healed, the "you" is plural in the Greek. It's not
Mhm.
singular, which means that the confession of the individual is actually healing to the community, not just to the individual. And I just wonder if churches, like, we would be so much better if we were more understanding and
Yeah,
grace
yeah,
filled towards
yeah,
people than we are sometimes. And we're
yeah,
there's an old phrase I heard, Christians are the only group of people that shoot their
right.
wounded. And I think there's a place there for churches to be, but it's tough because when you come out of like a holiness tradition, or a very rigid religious, any little thing that you do, which they are doing sometimes in their own selves, but they don't want their lead.
Yes.
Sometimes I think
Yeah.
we instill too much
Yeah.
into our pastors and into our leaders. They're people. I often, at Grace, I often say, hey, my kids punch each other. My kids wipe boogers on themselves. My kids aren't perfect. Our marriage isn't perfect. We argue from time to time. I try to lead with, hey, if you're looking up here for something, you're looking at the wrong dude, man. The answer's found in Christ. But I do think that, and I guess I would say to pastors and leaders, they need to set the culture. When you're the pastor who's always hammering everybody, your culture is going to hammer you when you do something wrong. If you're showing grace and you're leading with weakness and you're leading, your congregation's probably going to be a little bit more tolerant. Would you agree?
Yeah. A couple of things you said I want to touch on. One is back to James 5.
Yeah.
Not only does that bring healing, but toward the end of James 5, the whole idea of helping to cover a multitude of sins, that we're not brushing under the rug.
Right.
We're just treating it with grace and with healing and forgiveness. And the other thing that you touched on that I think is just brilliant is that the hammering it, we think it's going to solve a problem because we're saying don't do this and don't do this, and we're very clear with that. But studies show that, and I hesitate to even say this, but the more rigid or fundamentalist we are, the bigger the problem. There's a much higher pervasiveness of this problem in certain denominations than others. And I won't name them, but there tends to be within very strong fundamentalism, very high number of problems with this.
Wow.
Because we can't be perfect. And I'm being reminded all the time I'm not perfect and I'm evil and everything I've done is wrong because I know I don't measure up. I have looked at porn at some point, or I have masturbated at some point, or I have had these fantasies at some point, and now I'm like, it's over. And because I'm not hearing the grace, which is, that's a good name for a church, by the way, Grace.
That's why we named it Grace.
You should think about that, yeah.
So the unmerited favor of God. I remind people, I'm like, hey, our name's Grace. It's not Guilt Community Church. It's Grace Community Church,
Well, and what happens is we move so quickly from that pounding from guilt to shame. Guilt's okay, in my view. It tells me I've done something wrong. Shame's not good. That tells me I'm wrong. God's done something wrong because he created this mess. Now I'm blaming him. I have no hope. But as long as I'm living in grace instead of shame, and those are my two options, then I've got hope. And we call it there's still hope because we know there's always still hope.
That's right.
But we've got to move from that shame thing that we get so much in church, which is why a lot of people don't go to church that are struggling with this, because they can go to work and be patted on the back and say it's okay. But then the other ditch we don't want to get into is that just do whatever you want.
Correct. No,
it's not okay.
And that's obviously not biblical.
Yeah.
Paul, who said in Romans 7 that he, had struggles. He's also the same guy that said that ministers, should be a man that's devoted to his wife, that he should be a man not given to addictions. I think that you got to take the whole counsel. You can't take one passage and then run and go, oh, well, then I can do, whatever. Because that's not biblical. I always say that, the cherubim and seraphim don't circle the throne of God singing grace, 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 or love, love, love. They say holy, holy, holy. Mm-hmm. God is a holy God. Mm-hmm. So there is an element of, wanting to have right living. And you can't pull that out of the Bible and just say, oh, well, God's got a bunch of grace, so do whatever you want to do. Talk to me about the repercussions, because I think this is a really important part of this whole thing. Talk to me about the repercussions that the women have of men, and the specific thing would be pastors or leaders, but just men in general. What are some of the repercussions that women have when finally their husband or somebody maybe they're engaged to or maybe they're dating comes out and goes, here's the reality?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that they go through, and how do you help them?
Unspeakable trauma. We had a guy in a group recently where a couple other guys shared what they called their discovery day, meaning that's when their wife found out. And they said this Saturday is the 23rd anniversary or the 3rd anniversary of our discovery day. And another guy said, ours is coming up also. And then we had another guy whose wife doesn't know anything. And he said, how do y'all remember those dates? Why would you remember that? And one of the guys in the group said, do you remember the day your dad died? Do you remember the day of your divorce? Or do you remember the day you found out you had cancer? Well, yeah. And so, well, imagine, and this guy had enough wisdom to say, if someone dropped a ton of bricks on your head, you're probably going to remember that
Mm.
unless it destroys your brain. And the trauma that that creates for the wife is just unspeakable because
Mm.
they're now learning this guy I've been married to is a great guy, but he's got a mammoth problem,
Mm.
and it affects everything. Physically, am I safe? Do I have a disease from this guy? What can I really believe? At the end of the day, here's the thing about women. They want honesty.
Mhm.
And it's something men never understand. I don't get it. I mean, for me, I want to say whatever's going to be good for the next moment. That's just how I'm wired.
Mhm.
But I've learned that my wife has to absolutely know everything. And so we actually facilitate disclosures where they go through a therapeutic disclosure and they learn exactly everything. It's huge. Because when the wife discovers this is going on, then her whole world comes unraveled. And now she doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know who this
Mm.
guy is. And there's still hope. And so we always direct them. That's why Beth does groups for women and one on
Okay.
one with women with great success. But trauma is the big word. They are
Mm.
so traumatized, and the pain is so enormous that we as men will never understand unless our wife did it to us. And so they've got to get help. The trick there is that we recover on different paces. Usually, men recover faster. A man gets in recovery, he gets excited, he starts working the 12 steps, or he gets in a group with
Okay.
me, and he's reading stuff and he's going to therapy, he's doing great. And the wife is over here thinking, man, my world just ended. And I've got to have time to just learn how to even get out of bed the
Mm.
next day. And eventually, they've got to be in recovery together.
Okay.
We're starting couples groups in a couple of months based on our new workbook that's about to come out because that's really important. But trauma is the big thing, and women are just traumatized by this, and some of them never get over it, and some marriages don't make it
Mm.
because women can only take so much, and they all
Sure.
have a pain threshold.
Sure. They probably just feel neglected. They feel hurt. They feel like they weren't enough.
Yeah,
All of
absolutely.
those things,
Yeah, they take it on
which aren't
themselves.
necessarily true at
Not
all.
true at all.
But
Yeah,
that's just the way our minds work
sure.
and everything. What would you say to a Christian pastor or leader? What do you wish that you could see in every church in America in regards to this?
That's a great question. Um, resources.
Okay.
Don't try to be an expert, but we think that every church every year should talk about this one time.
Really? Okay.
I mean, you got 52 opportunities
Okay.
through the year. Every church every year should talk about this one time. And the way we would do that is something like having someone like us in on a Sunday to
Okay.
just share our story. It doesn't have to be the sermon, could be.
Okay.
We do that too. It could be a Saturday event for
Okay.
men, a men's prayer breakfast. We
Gotcha.
do some of those.
Okay.
But once a year, they need to hear that.
Okay.
And then just be ready when that person does come and says, I'm struggling with this pastor, have that resource ready to send them to.
How often, when you do a men's breakfast or you do a sermon or you do something like this
Mhm.
in a church, this once a year event, whatever that may
Right.
look like, how often do you have people come forward after that?
Oh, every time.
Every time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
they may not come immediately,
I got you.
but they will
But
come.
you're saying that it's almost inevitable if
Yeah,
you mention it, somebody's going to go, okay, me too.
yeah, yes. And it's Billy Graham used to say that people on average, I don't know where he got this, but on average, there's about 6 times in their adult life that they are ready to come to Christ, meaning a crisis happens or something big.
Hmm.
Someone died, or maybe they got married. It could be something good, but major life change positions us for a spiritual transformation. And his point was, we want to be there when that happens. Well, we want to be there when that happens. So when we speak in a church, the primary goal is not that they come forward in that moment because they may not have an issue then. We want them to think of us 3 months later
Okay.
when things do unfold. And so that's really our goal is to be on their mind when that does happen. And that happens all the time where
Okay.
guys then reach out to us. And we have hundreds of people that have found us and we don't even know how. They've signed up for my Recovery Minute, which is a devotional we send out every day.
Where can you get
Don't know
Recovery
them.
Minute?
They can just ask for it on there'sstillhope.org.
Okay,
They
so
can
they can
sign
sign
up
up there.
there.
You can sign up for Recovery Minute on theirstillhope.org.
Yep,
Okay.
that's all you got to do. And we love to do that, send it out. And many of those guys who I don't even know them, but they find us somehow,
Mm,
they will then contact me later and say, "I'm really struggling. Can you help me?" But
mm.
by being in the church once a year, now we would say we should be there once a month because the issue's so big. But as a guy who's a pastor, I know we're not the only issue in town.
Understand.
But just to be in their mind every now and then so that they know, A, the pastor cares and he's safe,
Sure.
and B, there are resources there.
You might find this interesting. We just spent 3 weeks on marriage. I called it perspectives. I flew in 3 different couples from 3 different backgrounds, from 3 different places in the United States, and brought them in to share about their marriage, to
Wow.
share about marriage. And I got up and said, listen, I'm not telling you I'm right. I'm not telling you I'm wrong. I just been in church for a long time, and what I see is we do a sermon on marriage and family, and we move along, and the marriage divorce rates in the church pretty much mirror the
Hmm.
marriage divorce rates of the world. And I said, I feel like that we need to do something different. So what we did is we have a couple that has written some books on marriage mentorship. They've mentored a number of couples that were ready. We unveiled after the 3 week series, people could come forth. We said, we want to create a safe space. No marriages are perfect. Everybody here's told you they've struggled. Everybody here's told you there's problems. These are pastors of large churches that are telling you they fought, they've done stuff. Typically, when you're in a marriage and you're struggling, and you go, we're not going to go to church because they'll think we're not Christian or whatever. I said, I wanted to create a safe place where you can come forth and find somebody that's ahead of you, a couple of seasons, or gone through some of the things that you've gone through, that's ready to mentor you, because I want to make a difference in marriages, because I think that the church has neglected
Hmm.
those particular
Hmm.
things. I'm getting the sense we're neglecting some of these other things like pornography as well. But what's the point that I wanted to make is I got a text from somebody at the church that said, I don't know why you're doing this in service. This should be relegated to a Sunday school or to
Right.
some evening thing. You're taking up time when we could be hearing good preaching and teaching. And I'm like going, this is exactly why marriages in the church are so bad, because nobody wants to deal with the real issues.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was
Yeah.
like, I can't even believe you sent me this text. Like, I wanted to, I mean, I actually, candidly, I wrote back about 8 texts that I had to erase.
I bet. That's
And
good.
finally I said, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
You
a
know, I
good
mean,
law
I'm
of
being, I'm being,
texting is
I'm
don't
being,
respond too
I'm
quick.
like, I wanted to say, are you,
I don't know,
but
it's more amazing that they thought it or they actually told you that. I mean, that's incredible.
the best part was it was funny is it was on it was Father's Day, and it was Happy Father's Day. Oh, and by the way, why are we doing this? It's
Yeah.
just, but my point being is that I don't think the person who sent that text is a bad person. I don't think they're, I just think that sometimes we're oblivious
Sure.
to things that
Sure.
we're not maybe at the point in our life where it's really a big deal. We had at our 11 o'clock service this last weekend, the people that were in had asked people to stand if they wanted help in their marriage. And I mean, literally, I'm being for real. I had tears that streamed down my cheeks at the amount of people that stood up that wanted
Yeah.
prayer.
Yeah.
And I'm like, these are the issues. I love to talk about incipient Gnosticism and the Johannine epistles, but people don't care about
You don't
that.
get a lot of questions
No,
on
they
that.
don't even care about that.
Well,
They don't.
here's the way I look at that I think is really interesting. It's required in churches now that you have to have a handicap wheelchair ramps to get in and out of the
Hmm.
church. And that's because 3% of the people who ever come to church need that. A lot of churches with older people are figuring out that hearing impaired is an issue
Hmm.
because 15% of people will have a hearing loss. And so they deal with that. We have a good sound system for that. We want to
Yep.
make sure they can
Yep.
hear us. And then we have an issue where 62% of the men are struggling with this every single
And we do
month,
nothing about it.
and we do nothing. I mean, how insane would that be? If 62% of the people in our church could not get in without a wheelchair ramp, we would build one. If 62% of the people need help with porn or sexual issues, we need to address that.
That is a great point. Somebody's lasted this long.
Yeah.
They've sat through this, and they're feeling that guilt. They're feeling that shame. They were looking maybe for something that was going to give them, the answer or whatever. What would you say to that person?
Well, what I would say is contact us. We want to be available. You can call or text me anytime. Can I give my number?
Absolutely.
We live here in Florida. Thrilled to be here. So my cell number is a Florida number, 941-526-4700, 941-526-4700. There'sstillhope.org. I respond to emails quickly, quicker than I probably should sometimes. But the main thing I would say to anyone who's struggling with this is absolutely get help because you're not alone. There are so many people that are where you are. We can offer resources, we can offer groups, we can do one-on-one. If you're a woman watching this or you're married to a woman and you're struggling with this, my wife can help her, but absolutely get help. There's a safe place to land. We know this. A study was done years ago that showed 1 out of 20,000 ever got over pornography on their own. You cannot do this alone. Just like the body of Christ is created for a reason, you can't do this alone. Quickly, there's something we call the man code. We look at Jesus, and Jesus had the number one in his life, which was God. He had three, which was the disciples, Peter, Peter, James, and John. He had the 12, the small group. Then he had the church, the 120, the community, the 5,000. With this struggle, most of us don't have the three. We don't have those three guys that know our stuff.
That's great.
You need three people that know your stuff, and we'd be happy to be one of those. And be in a church that is a safe place, the way Grace is, that says you can land here, we want to help you, we're not going to condemn you, we want to help you. You've got to be in the body of Christ. You've got to know that you're not alone. You've got to reach out. And if you're a pastor, you've got to be a resource for people. You don't have to know the answers, but you need to be able to find the answers. And at There's Still Hope, Beth and I would love to help you do that any way we can.
I appreciate that. Listen, this is a real issue, and I hope that if you've listened to this and maybe go back and watch it again, there's just a lot of information here and a lot of things for us as pastors and leaders to think through. Mark, I just want to say thank you for taking your time to come in here and talk about this. I mean, I know that this is something that you do, but I just appreciate this. I think this is very enlightening, very informing. Even as a pastor and a leader, it makes me think, okay, what are my next steps and what do I have to do?
I want to tell you real quick, thank you for allowing us to, because what this says about your heart for people is amazing. That you're not just a teacher, as important as that is, you're a pastor who cares. To see this issue and address it like this, almost nobody is doing what you're doing right now. So thank you for doing that.
We're just trying to help pastors. I mean, trying to help leaders. It sometimes can be a very lonely island for people. When I talk to pastors, just the things, they don't feel like anybody cares about them. They don't feel like all they get is negativity, and just really have a heart to try to resource them. Well, hope you've enjoyed today. Again, please, you can subscribe and like all of our forms of social media. They'll be at the bottom of the screen, or sometimes they come down the side in really cool characters. Also, if anything you need, you can find everything at reachnextgen.com. Thank you so much for listening and watching today. God bless you. Hey, Chip here. I just want to take a moment and say thanks so much for watching Reaching the Next Generation. I really hope that this was something that was beneficial to you. And what I would ask, if you really enjoyed this, would you like it? Would you subscribe to it? Would you give us some comments? And most importantly, would you share it? I believe with all of my heart that the material and the content that we have on this channel truly can make a difference and resource pastors and leaders and Christians, and you can help us to truly help others to reach the next generation. Thanks so much for being a part of our channel.